Hey, one of the topics that I just worry to death, I know sometimes it gets very hard to continue to listen to my tirades against Christian fascism. I get that. I understand. But I just feel compelled to do so because to me it is a horrific and very real threat, not just to this country, but to democracy anywhere and probably civilization in general. And I sometimes mention the fact that I was brought up in the Christian belief system. I understand it. I know what it's about. I'm not criticizing from the outside, more or less. I'm not standing back and saying, well, those people are a bunch of crazies. It just so happens that Christianity took a horrific turn over the past several decades. I mean, seriously took a horrific turn. Now, we can argue, and I've done this before, argue that Christianity has always been a bloody, murderous religion. And all you have to do to verify that is to look at the history of Christianity vis-a-vis Europe. It's one of the reasons we have the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law establishing a religion because the framers knew what religion, look how many wives Henry VIII had just because he couldn't have his own way with the Catholic Church. It just goes on and on and on and on. Okay, Crusades, the Holocaust, the Inquisitions, several of them. It's been a bloody, murderous religion. Oh, but God loves you. All right. Here in this country, the rise of Christian fascism has been inexorable. It's been slow, but it's there. And now it is starting. Actually started a decade or two ago. It's really started to make inroads into governance. Let me give you the latest example. And this is from the Religion News Service, a Protestant-run organization. This is not from some secular outfit like, oh, God forbid, MSNBC or CNN or the New York Times. No, this is from Religion News Service. And they start out with a little bit of a story from North Idaho, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Now, we've heard of Coeur d'Alene before. There has been, over the past several decades, a convocation there of right-wing, white, male, insane people and their women who believe in a kind of Christianity that is probably the more murderous of all the different phases of Christian nationalism. But I digress. The story comes from Coeur d'Alene. Last month, dozens of local activists packed into a small room in the Post Falls Library. They were there for a board meeting of the Community Library Network. Okay? Now, some of the people that showed up there came to defend the library, but there's a video of the meeting circulating that suggests most people there were to condemn library administrators for allowing children access to what these people insisted were pornographic books. And this is very similar, this kind of bullshit from these Christian nationalists, as at other protests, which is part of this nationwide Christian hate-filled movement targeting public libraries. At other protest speakers, repeatedly, as they did at this Post Falls Library meeting, repeatedly intermingled their 3-minute limit speeches with appeals to their brand of the Christian faith and to the Bible as they see it to be the ultimate moral arbiter. Not law, religion. One critic scolded the library board for promoting content in books that affirms LGBTQ people instead of stashing the library with what he called other books, quote, such as the Bible, such as Christian things, such as American things, such as patriotic things, end quote. But then Josiah Mannion decided to speak. It was his turn. He's a local photographer. And he's an activist representing this newly formed Community Library Network Alliance. These are good guys. He's also a Christian. He rose to speak in defense of the library, and he cast his objections to what was going on in terms of this Christian fascism. He said this, quote, "Those leading this attack on the libraries, both locally and nationally, can be directly linked to patriarchal white Christian nationalism," end quote. Now, no sooner did he say that than, according to the Religion News Service, the room erupted into screaming and insults, with one person screaming, and I'm going to quote, screaming at Mr. Mannion, "Shut the fuck up!" And a member of the library board repeatedly begged the crowd to let Mr. Mannion speak. And as other people follow Mr. Mannion to the microphone to support this library, the Christian fascists wouldn't settle down. And that caused heated exchanges throughout the meeting. And at some point, the police were called. After this was over, Mr. Mannion told the Christian News Service he should have expected the outburst, but he admitted, quote, "I didn't see it coming," end quote. But another person there, a woman named Alicia Abbott, she's a pro-democracy activist in Idaho, and she's a longtime critic of Christian fascism. Although these people continue to refer to it as Christian nationalism. Nationalism, fascism, come on. She said this, quote, "This is quite the common occurrence." She added, "I have been given the gavel and heckled several times myself for using terms like Christian nationalism or asking questions of accountability of these people in both local public comment and state public testimony," end quote. So people, and I've tried to make this distinction. I don't know to what extent I've been successful in doing this, maybe not successful at all, but I've tried to make the distinction between people who want to, of their own choosing, decide to follow the religion established around the mythology of Jesus of Nazareth as being a gentle, loving person who was here to fulfill the law and to change the law into a law of not vengeance and death and destruction, but a law of love and kindness and decency. Now, that was the Christian, that was the Jesus of Nazareth that I was taught by my grandmother. That's how it was explained to me. But I've read enough history now to understand that Jesus of Nazareth was a radical revolutionary. What he wanted was the Romans to hell out of the Holy Land, what the Jews saw as the Holy Land. Gentle? Kind? Maybe. But that wasn't his, from what I've read, that wasn't his main political thrust. His main political thrust, and yes, he had it, was to remove Roman law, Roman rule, so that the Israelites, the early Jews, could get back to the idea of worshiping their singular God. But I digress. Now, devotees of these Christian fascist politics have migrated, have flocked to this part of Idaho that I'm talking about over the decades, and some of the surrounding states. But Idaho is the one that gets the award for having attracted the most radical of these people. And for just as long, these people who have gone there have met resistance, including from faith leaders, from other Christians, from Christians who want to practice the Christian faith probably in the same manner, essentially, as I was taught it. Now, among this broad constellation of activists in Idaho who are trying to resist these Christian Nazis. Elected officials and everyday locals are pushing back. Among them is an Episcopal bishop. Her name is Gretchen Rayberg, whose diocese in Spokane, Washington, stretches from eastern Washington across much of North Idaho and into western Montana. And in recalling her childhood in Moscow, Idaho, Bishop Rayberg told the Religion News Service she remembers locals speaking out as extremists, particularly white nationalists, as they attempted to establish these enclaves in Idaho over the years when she was a kid growing up. She was aware, even then, that these bastards were moving in. But recent years, you see, have seen a renewed influx of these Christian fascists to the area, particularly among some who are fleeing the liberal politics in California and other blue states. Oh, they can't stand it. Equality, equal justice under the law, equal opportunity at education, at voting, all the equality shit. Oh no, we're leaving. We want to go where real Christians gather. So one of the destination points is Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and the surrounding area. Now, this latest influx of these Christian fascists has unsettled Bishop Rayberg, in part because she sees modern Christian nationalism as overlapping with other forms of white nationalism. Well, yes, which is what your humble and obedient servant here has been talking about for, I don't know what, 15, 20 years? She said, or she's quoted by Religion News Service as saying, quote, "I've been very concerned at what I see as the very deliberate, intentional recruitment of folks into northern Idaho that support white nationalism, Christian nationalism," end quote. Now, Religion News Service reports that things sort of came to a head last September when there was news out there that the Reawaken America tour, that's was heading that way. That's a traveling roadshow of freaks and assholes featuring a self-declared Christian nationalist, a bunch of them, and prominent members of Trump's inner circle. Of course. And word circulated that an event was planned in Post Falls. That's the name of the little town there. And as the date neared, Bishop Rayberg published a scathing editorial in a local newspaper. It said in part this, quote, "Christian nationalism is heresy for Christians and dangerous rhetoric for all Americans. To state that is not a denial of Christianity or a denigration of patriotism. Rather, it's the call to a proper relationship between church and state," end quote. Amen to that, Bishop. So Bishop Rayberg teamed up with an organization called Faithful America. That's a national activist group, to stage a protest that they named Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And the protest was scheduled the same day as the Reawaken America event was to occur. The Reawaken America event might as well have been something out of Nuremberg in the 1930s. I mean, these are Nazis. These are fascists who disguise themselves as Christians. They believe in a brand of Christianity that is vile and hateful and destructive and dangerous. And she was joined, Bishop Rayberg was joined by a bunch of faith leaders from across the region, Montana, Idaho, Washington. A Presbyterian leader, Reverend Cheryl Kinderpile, told the crowd during the event, quote, "I stand in opposition to the use of the gospel for political gain," end quote. eventually North Idaho and the surrounding region will unite against these Christian fascists. That's the hope. Oh, don't put a lot of hope in that, folks, not given the way things are going. And back to Bishop Rayburg, she said, quote, as the extremists get louder, my hope, my prayer is that the rest of us will become more concerned and start to speak up, start to educate ourselves, push back, and say, quote, this is not who we are, end quote. This is not who we are. How many times have we heard that after the murder of a black motorist? And the city where it occurred, well, this is not who we are. Or something happens where children coming across the border, the parents seeking political asylum, are locked into cages. And somebody always says, hey, wait, this is not who we are. Well, then who the hell is it? This is what we are allowing in this country to proceed apace. The pace being toward Christian fascism getting a death grip on American democracy and American freedom, such as it is. And any effort to try to live up to what the framers of our Constitution wrote down 240 years ago. And what they wrote down has yet to be honored and respected and lived up to in this country as a whole. You know that as well as I do. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.